the flagship program in this state, right? And
a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, post College Football Week 4. My name is Michael Ween. We are here live Sunday, September 22nd, the night of Week 3 of the NFL season, 8:18 p.m. Central Time, and we are back for another episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. We have a lot to get to tonight, including some game recaps, some SEC contender discussions, and some Texas SEC schedule discussion as they enter SEC play as the number one team in the country here this weekend against Mississippi State. We'll get into all of that here in the next hour or so. If you like what we do here, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find all of our content under the live section of our YouTube channel. We have Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, and we have all of our other episodes of the Raw Prospect Podcast located there. You can also find us now on Instagram, and you can also find us on our Patreon, as you see the link there down at the bottom. Check it out. It is free. There is no paywall currently on our Patreon. We post on our Patreon like every month or so. And if we get more support there, we'll start to do it more often. But as of right now, as you guys know, we are on a Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday schedule. And now that we're getting into the groove of football season, you kind of know what the layout of those shows look like. Although it will look a little different once the NBA starts up and baseball playoffs heat up here in the next couple weeks. Emmy Nixon joins me tonight, as always. Emmy, I know you probably have some mixed feelings right now, but how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, man. Despite the Cowboys losing tonight, I mean, we were down 28-6 in the fourth quarter. So, late in the third quarter. So, I mean, we were supposed to lose that game. But I did want to start today's show with a little bit of advice for y'all. If you are on a budget, if you are budgeting, do not let your car get towed twice in 1 week. Oof. There you go. Because this morning, I got my car towed for the second time in a week. And gosh, like, I want to be mad, but like, I just can't. Like, I'm just numb to it at this point.
Well, I'm glad you have a good outlook on or a good perspective on the Cowboys game. And I'm glad you're in a pretty good mood despite your car getting towed twice in a week.
Yeah.
We're here to talk some college football. There are 2 Monday night games tomorrow. So I actually thought about, maybe doing NFL recap tonight, but there's a good game going on right now in Atlanta. And there's 2 games going on tomorrow. So I said, well, we're just going to wait until Tuesday on that front. Okay. Let's just go ahead and start off, since this is Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, with Texas thrashing 51-3. I don't know that final result surprises anybody with the way that Texas has been playing in their opponent. No offense to UL Monroe. They're actually, I think, going to be a pretty competitive Sun Belt team this season. They came into that game 2-0 with General Booty as the quarterback, and by the end of it, we saw some of their other quarterbacks. But the big story going into the game and the big story of the game was Arch Manning. So we're not so much going to talk about the result of the Texas game. We kind of expected that. But what I do want to talk about is some individual takeaways from it. And so we'll start with Arch. What were your thoughts on Arch Manning's first career start?
Well, we got to know what his style is as a quarterback. I think in the times that he's gone into the games up to this point, up by 30 or 40 or whatever it is, you don't really get a sense of who he actually is as a quarterback because he's just running the offense at that point.
Right.
You're running on cruise control. But yesterday, we got to see Arch Manning is a gunslinger. He's gonna, be extremely aggressive, get the ball downfield, and he did throw 2 picks. I would attribute one of them to just inexperience. I think that first one in particular, I think if he had that back, he wouldn't have thrown it at all. He would have just ate it and taken the sack and lived to fight another day. But you live and you learn. That was his first ever start as a redshirt freshman. So the growing pains, if you could even call it pain, it's not really pain. It's just growing. For being entirely honest, but I thought it was really, really good. The ball really pops out of his hand, and his throwing motion is just so tight and compact, and honestly, just beautiful to watch. To be honest, like you can tell he's a Manning from that standpoint. Um, I thought his running ability showed up as well. Just being able to extend plays, and I think we know that he's not going to be just looking to run after the first read. He wants to play in the pocket for the most part, but he's going to extend when he has to. And that's really what you want from your quarterback.
Yeah, I think you hit on everything there. Ultimately, it was a pretty good night for the number one team in the country. And look, if anything, Arch Manning was able to put some money into the 2025 piggy bank for next season. As a young quarterback, and this can apply in the NFL, I guess, but it especially applies in college. Okay? When you are a young quarterback, whether you're a freshman or a redshirt freshman, you have all these firsts that you have to go through. Your first career start, your first career road start at Texas, your first career Red River game, right? Your first career, bad performance. Like you have all these humps that you eventually have to get over until you get to the point where Quinn Ewers is, where he's kind of seen everything that college football has to throw at him. He's been in a college football semifinal. He's been in the Red River game. He's had injuries. He's had to play through some injuries. He's had to play through some adversity. He's had his first career road start. He's won big games. Arch is going to have to go through these things. But if the Longhorns were able to accomplish anything last night in a game where you knew they were going to win. Once they were up 14-0, you knew that game was over with the way the defense is playing. If they were able to accomplish anything, though, that's his first career start. And I think if you were to ask Steve Sarkisian and this coaching staff, AJ Milwee, the quarterback's coach, that entire coaching staff, everybody within the Texas football program, hey, if Quinn, something was to happen to Quinn, right? Coming into the season. It's happened the past couple of years. We don't want it to happen. But if something minor like this oblique injury, that seems like best case scenario, he might be out the Mississippi State game and he'll be back by OU. That's what it seems like. But it could have been a lot worse than that, right? But if Quinn had to miss, say, 1 or 2 games like he has the past couple of seasons, where would you want it to occur in the schedule that you guys have coming into the season? And I think they would have told you, like, oh, as long as Quinn's not severely injured, not that we want him to be hurt at all, but, it would help us. It would help our program. It would help our outlook for next year if Arch Manning could get not only some playing time, but an actual start in a regular season game with stakes. And he did. He made some mistakes. But the thing I like about Arch is, the talent's obvious. The thing I like about it, though, is he wants to throw the football down the field. Yeah. And look, I think he needs to dial it back a little bit, especially once he gets, up against some tougher competition. That was one thing that I think Quinn struggled with early on in his career. Sometimes he would try to make too much happen and against better competition, that can sometimes hurt you. But the one thing about Quinn that I don't think he does as well as Arch does is throw the deep ball. I think Arch throws a beautiful deep ball for the most part.
Yep.
So, look, I mean, it was a pretty good night. I didn't think Texas played their A game. I didn't even think they played a B plus game, to be honest with you. But that just speaks to how good this team really is. I think they can. With the Oklahoma situation we're going to talk about, I think they can play a B minus game and beat Oklahoma by 28 points. I mean, I might be wrong, but that's the way it looks right now. That's the way it looks from what I've seen. Because they're so deep, and a lot of these young guys are getting that experience. So on the Arch front, it was fine. It was a solid performance. A lot of good, a little bad, but those are learning experiences. And Sark's going to coach him hard, and he accepts the hard coaching. So that's good to know. If you had to hand out 3 game balls, aside from maybe Arch, aside from the quarterbacks, who would those game balls go to?
Well, I thought Jadon Blue, first and foremost, the 4 touchdowns, the tough running between the tackles.
Yep.
I think him being in this, workhorse role, it might even help his draft stock quite a bit, to be honest, because he's got some explosiveness. He's twitchy in short areas, and he can make some guys miss. And he's physical enough to where he can run between the tackles and hold his own in there. So I'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But the second game ball, I think, would be to Anthony Hill Jr. The interception, the plays he's been making in the backfield, just all over the place, man. It just seems like he's always around the ball. And really that's a theme with the entire Texas defense is they just fly around. We got so much speed. It's ridiculous. It just feels like the other team is playing in slow motion sometimes. Like there's just 5 players to the ball as soon as they catch it, if they do catch it, of course. The third one, I think maybe just one for that entire offensive line. Or honestly, yeah. I mean the entire offensive line. I think in terms of running the football, that's the push that we want to see. And I know it's Louisiana Monroe, but they still had to go do it, and they did. Like in years past, we would play a team like this. We would play down to competition. And when you have an offensive line this good, it's almost impossible to play down to competition because your offensive linemen are 3 yards down the field. So it's just like, even if your running back falls over, that's 3 yards per carry by default.
Yeah, I would 100% agree pretty much everything you said. I think one of the most important things that happened last night was, if you got to watch the game, it was on ESPN Plus. That won't happen again this season, I promise. Jadon Blue reestablished himself as the no doubt about it starting running back going into conference play. And he looks healthy, which is great. So that's number one. 4 touchdowns. He was just the go-to guy on offense yesterday. And Jarrett Gibson, as he has early on this season, is starting to improve. He held onto the ball yesterday, which is something I was hoping I would see from him. That's still a little bit of a concern in the Texas running back room for me. I want to see this good ball security continue into conference play. But I thought Jadon Blue was fantastic. And then I would just give a game ball to the entire Texas linebacker group as a whole. Like, you're right about Anthony Hill. He's the best player on the defense, in my opinion. I think he's going to be an All-American. And it's great because we get him back next year too. He's
Yeah.
Might be the best player on the team next year, depending on what Arch looks like. He's just really good. Like, that's why you keep recruiting a guy like that, even when he's committed to A&M. But I think maybe not as big of a story as Anthony Hill, because not as many people are going to talk about it. But the way that David Binda and Leona Lafau are playing right now.
Yeah.
And you know what I think that is more than anything a result of? Who did Texas hire in the offseason as their new linebackers coach and co-defensive coordinator? Johnny Nansen. I think this is all Johnny Nansen. The way that he developed Jacob Manu, one of the best linebackers in the country, one of the best linebackers in the Pac-12 last year at Arizona. The way that he uses his linebackers and the way that he's coaching these guys, especially the younger guys, it's showing up right now. And I know it's Louisiana Monroe, and I'm not saying Leona Lafau is going to start at any point this season, but he's playing some really good football. The read that he made when Louisiana Monroe was backed up in their own end zone, down 35-3 to get that safety on the run play, the way he read that play, shot the gap, and hit the running back to make sure he didn't get out of the end zone, that's good stuff right there. I think that's a great evaluation by Texas. And again, that's another young guy showing up. All this recruiting that Texas is doing is not for nothing. Like, they're getting these elite talents in the program, and they're developing them. They have the culture. They have everything. And that's why they are where they are right now as an SEC title favorite and the number one team in the country. But I think the linebacker room, especially the performance of David Binda, I mean, man, how far that guy has come in the last year and a half. I think it speaks to the coaching of Pete Kwiatkowski, the way this defense is playing. A lot of people had questions about PK early on in his career, but I think a lot of those doubts have been silenced. It feels like Terry Joseph and company have the talent in the secondary to finally, have a championship caliber unit back there as long as everyone's healthy. And, while the defensive line, the interior of the defensive line isn't going to make a ton of splash plays, or at least they haven't yet, I think what Kenny Baker has done with that group so far is pretty good. We just need that group. Yeah. We just need that group to be above replacement level. We just need them to be solid in conference play, because I think the units around them are all better. I think the edge rush group is better. I think the linebackers are. I mean, they did lose Jalen Ford. I'm not going to downplay that, right? I mean, he was an All-American at one point, but I think the linebackers are playing really good. They're at least as good as they were last year, if not a little better.
I would even argue there's a higher ceiling at linebacker with how Anthony Hill is playing.
Absolutely.
Down to down, play to play, just
right. And then the secondary is obviously better, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's really all that needs to be said. I also think, Texas was down Derek Williams last night. And I know Louisiana Monroe wasn't a huge threat to hurt, you through the air, but I thought Michael Taft played an excellent game last night. He was around the football. He had the targeting call, but of course that gets overturned, which is good. But aside from that, I thought he played great. I think Andrew Makuba continues to play well. And I don't think Malik Muhammad's allowed a reception a month, it feels like. So, yeah, the defense is legit. And one thing I wanted to talk about before we get into two other games that I want to also discuss is when you look at this SEC schedule, and we're going to talk about Oklahoma and Tennessee here up next, but some of the one thing you can maybe say about Texas right now is who is the legitimate quarterback that they've played so far. And so the question I want to ask you is, when you look at the SEC schedule, look at the Oklahoma situation, consider Mississippi State, consider Florida, Kentucky, A&M, their situation at quarterback. When you look at this SEC schedule, how many quarterbacks should Texas really be concerned about? Is it Carson Beck and then
I mean, there are games to be concerned about, but quarterbacks, I mean, that's different. I mean, that's I think last year spoiled us a little bit. It was a historically deep quarterback year, just across the board. So this year it's a lot of new guys, and that's playing itself out. I think just there's a lot of talented young quarterbacks. I think. I mean, I think the fact that we don't play LSU, I think Nussmeier is very solid.
Yep.
I think what Arkansas has done has
Yep.
been pretty good as well. So Texas did luck out in a few areas with that, but um, I think it's just Georgia, and then I look at that Kentucky game as one that in between Oklahoma and playing Georgia. Wait, no, it's in between Georgia and A&M game. I think that's the game that you look at as possible trap game. But we of course talked about that in the offseason as well.
As far as quarterbacks are concerned, I think it's Carson Beck here, like up here near the Cam Wards and the Quinn Ewers and the quarterbacks that we often talked about coming into the season. And then I'm still wait and see on the A&M situation. Marcel Reed's done a good job filling in for Connor Wigman while he tries to get healthy and back on the field for them. As good as a job as they could have hoped for, right? And they're running the football better. Like they're now, I think, sit at 3-1, so they're fine. But until I see, I'm still in a wait and see situation with that. Does Connor Wigman get healthy? Is he back, or is he just not what we thought he was coming into the season? I still want to see how that situation plays out for the next couple weeks. They have a tough game in Dallas this weekend against Arkansas. That's a game we might talk about because I think if you're looking at the schedule right now, I think where the Kentucky game is placed makes it dangerous. I don't think the team itself is that threatening to Texas as of right now. I don't think the Kentucky team as a whole, even though they're pretty good up front on the defensive line, I think Texas has the offensive line to kind of neutralize that. I don't think the team itself poses any danger on paper to Texas. I do think where the game is placed is where you could be right about that as a trap game because it's placed between the Arkansas game, which is a rivalry game, and the A&M game.
Right. Yeah, that's
those are two highly emotional, physical fights that Texas is going to be in. Even if they win both of those games by a couple scores, those still are teams that are going to, try to beat you up physically. They're going to bring the fight to Texas, even if they're just outmanned and outmatched, right? The games I'm looking at right now, based on what I've seen so far, aside from the Georgia game, is actually that Arkansas game in Fayetteville. That's the game that right now concerns me a little more than like Florida and Vanderbilt, even though Vanderbilt's, I think, improved.
Yeah, that quarterback
even Oklahoma
there.
Taylon Green, transfer from Boise State. He's not great, but he can do it with his legs. And he's played pretty good this season. If it weren't for, a blown lead to Oklahoma State, Arkansas would be undefeated right now. So, look, Sam Pittman's coaching for his job, and I think he's doing a really good job. That now the break I think Texas catches that's going to be an early kickoff. That's going to be an 11 a.m. So even though you're going on the road into still a hostile environment, it's not going to be the nightmare that was a couple years back where it was a night game and those fans had all day to drink and get riled up. It is an early kickoff. I think that helps Texas, but above all else, unless we see like DJ Lagway really take off with Florida, that's the game I'm looking at.
Yeah.
So that's that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, I would say I agree with everything you say on Arkansas, man. That fan base hates Texas so much. I mean, they hate Texas like Nathan Peterman throws picks, like intensely.
Yeah, and at SEC Media Days, Sark said Arkansas hates Texas more than they love themselves. And guess what Sam Pittman's response to him was? He's right. The Arkansas coach said he's right. So you're absolutely right about it. That will be a hostile environment. But what do we know? Texas has done a pretty good job, going into hostile environments the past year and a half. So
Yeah.
There's that. Okay, I think we addressed the SEC schedule, which I had in our lineup tonight. Anything else? Just any other observations about the SEC schedule, OU aside, because we're about to talk about Oklahoma before we get into this Tennessee-Oklahoma game?
Well, are there any concerns from a team standpoint for Texas right now heading into conference play in your mind?
Any concerns from a team standpoint heading into conference play? No. Aside from injuries, I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's scary right now is like I can't think of anything. I can't. Like if you told me, okay, you're the coach that's playing against Texas this week, go make a game plan. I don't know what the fuck to do. I mean, I don't. Like with Quinn, it's like, okay, you can try and confuse him with some crazy coverages and all that, but then you're leaving yourself exposed to all that speed on the outside. And then you also got the run game to deal with. It's like, the fuck do you do?
I think the only thing I would say is the right side of the offensive line from a discipline standpoint, not from a talent standpoint,
Yeah.
not from like their ability. I think DJ Campbell and Cam Williams are both NFL players, but the discipline hasn't been great so far this season. This is a fantastic team. It's number one in the country. It's one of the best teams in America, right? Top to bottom. They're really deep. Their weaknesses from a year ago are now possibly their biggest strength on defense, right? Their weakness, their Achilles heel from a year ago is maybe the strength of their defense now. And, they've got, their second stringers could still probably be a above average defense in the SEC. I mean, they've got players everywhere. The same thing on offense, like Colin Page, who's a walk-on. If there was another 10 minutes in that game, last night, like he would have run for maybe close to 100 yards.
Yeah.
And he's a walk-on. He's like the fifth string running back. Ryan Niblett, who moved recently from receiver to running back, the only reason being because there's too many good receivers on this Texas team for him to even get any playing time. And that guy was a super blue chip. Like,
Yeah.
the
Can't
only
make
thing
that shit up.
the only thing I would pinpoint, I want to see DJ Campbell and Cam Williams clean up the penalties a little bit. But aside from that, aside from penalties, turnovers, injuries, no, nothing.
Nothing.
As long as Quinn gets back for the OU Georgia stretch, I think we'll be okay. All right. Do you agree with that? Do you have anything else you
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
add?
I mean the little thing we talked about last year too is when we get into close games, just some of the like clock management stuff. We haven't really seen if that's been addressed yet, but might not need to. I mean,
You know what has
this
been addressed though? Red zone,
yeah,
red zone execution
fuck yeah, it has. Yeah,
to this point. I think they're converted on like 90% of their red zone, or maybe even more than that. So where it'll really be tested, I think, is Georgia. But so far, like Texas has been almost flawless in the red zone. Okay. So for the second half of the show, I want to talk about two games, and then I want to play a little game with, we're through 4 weeks. I know there hasn't been a ton of SEC on SEC games yet. We're getting into that this week. But a little season of like SEC contender tiers, like who we put in tier one. But before we do that, Tennessee and OU last night. Tennessee comes out with the victory, 25-15. A lot of storylines in this game, including Josh Heupel going back to his old stomping grounds and beating his alma mater. Let's start with the victory side of things, Tennessee. I guess my question, well, I won't ask that question yet. What were your takeaways from Tennessee? What were your biggest takeaways from Tennessee's victory over Oklahoma?
well, first thing I'll say is I wasn't able to watch this game live, but what I did pick up from watching it back, Tennessee's physicality as a team
Yep.
has taken a huge leap forward, and this is not the same type of team that we saw in 2022 when they were competitive and ended up, you know, beating Alabama.
Yeah, 10
This
wins.
is
Yeah.
this is a better team.
Yeah.
Now, from a passing game standpoint, I think there's still room to grow, and that goes without saying with a freshman quarterback. But that's where I look at them and like, what will happen when a team plays them and makes them throw 35 times? Because that hasn't really happened yet. Um, to this point, there hasn't really been a team that has touched this run game that Tennessee has put out. And that's a credit to them, the talent that they have, but also just that's the underlying question here. That defense is legit. I don't have any questions about their defense at this point. Even with Oklahoma's problems on offense that are their own doing, Tennessee just made plays, just flat out.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're 100% spot on. Tennessee, their defense is awesome. There are still some questions, or I won't say even questions. There's still a little bit of hesitancy
Right.
amongst the people to go to say that E word, right? To say the elite word, because we haven't seen them maybe face a high level like quarterback yet. Just like I don't think seen Texas face that, or even Alabama face that yet. We're gonna see all this play out. So all those concerns that maybe some people have, which I don't really have, will play itself out down the road. But this defense, I mean, I think they have one of the best defensive lines in the country, period. I think James Pierce is a first round pick at defensive end. They've got, Dominic Bailey, Tyree West. All those guys had at least 4 pressures. And I know it's a bad Oklahoma offensive line, but part of it in college football nowadays with these 18 and 19-year-old kids is you still have to, get it out of them. You still have to get these performances out of them consistently. Those are all upperclassmen. They're experienced, and they've all come up together. They're physical on that side. I think The way that they've rebuilt this secondary is pretty impressive. You know, they're this is a roster that's complete. They're a complete roster, and it's different than it was 2 years ago when the personnel wasn't quite as good as it is now. They had Hendon Hooker. They had a really good offense with Jalen Hyatt and company. It was explosive, throw the ball downfield. Now the defense has caught up. Kind of like Texas has, right? Texas had the offense when Sark got here. Maybe it wasn't as good as it is now. Quinn wasn't as good as he is today, obviously, but you know, they still were able to be explosive offensively. They just didn't have the defense and the culture to hold up for 4 quarters on that side of the ball. They didn't have the personnel they have now on that side of the ball either. Kind of the same thing with Tennessee. Like they finally have a close to championship caliber defense. It's a complete football team. And the way that they run the ball with Dylan Sampson, even when it's not going the greatest, right? Even when they're not having a lot of success early in the game, going up against a really good defense, they keep at it. And eventually they break 1 or 2 runs, and now you look up and, you know, they're in the red zone, right? And it's working all of a sudden, and they're rolling offensively. And more importantly, like that offensive line was tested a little bit last night because Oklahoma was getting pressure. They forced 2 fumbles on Nico, right? But Lance Hurd, their left tackle, was out with an injury. And so now you're asking, you know, a backup left tackle to come in against a really good defensive front. I think there are ways that Nico can grow. It wasn't a light up the stat sheet performance, 13 for 21, 194 yards and 1 touchdown. But that's a really good defense that Oklahoma has. They have a lot of issues on offense, but their defense, like I think one of the reasons Oklahoma fans should be believers in Brent Venables is he has now his side of the ball figured out. He's a defensive guy. Oklahoma as a defense is really damn good. They're well coached on that side of the ball. They're physical. Danny Stutzman is a likely All-American. They're really good on defense. But their offense, which we're going to get to here in a second, just I don't even know what to say at this point. But from a Tennessee perspective, I mean, it wasn't the prettiest game in the world. They didn't go out and put up 50 points like they have so far this season. They didn't put up 500 yards of offense. But at the end of the day, they did enough to win. And they're a more complimentary football team than they were 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, they won 10 games and beat Alabama. So it's not an easy schedule. They don't get the favorable schedule that, say, maybe Texas or Missouri gets. But with this team, they can run with Texas. They can run with Georgia. They can run with Bama. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind about that. So that's the Tennessee side of things. Oklahoma. What do you say about their offense and Jackson Arnold getting benched? What's your take on all that stuff?
It's if you had told me that before the season started that Jackson Arnold got benched at this point in the season, I wouldn't have thought that was very likely. Like I just wouldn't have. I thought Jackson Arnold going into the year, I thought he would be pretty good, and he just hasn't found his rhythm as a passer just yet. And I think if I'm Brent Venables, I have a defense in place that just needs to have an offense that can control the ball. Just play ball control, keep the clock running, shorten the game, keep my defense fresh. I think that's your route if you're Oklahoma. The difficult thing is that's also a bunch of SEC teams route too to win. And are you going to out SEC teams in year one?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think the answer is no. And
Yeah.
I'm not even trying to hate on Oklahoma. Like, I'm trying to be as respectful as possible.
Yeah, I mean that's completely fair, and I mean with all the
Um,
injuries they've had too,
the
it's just
offensive
made everything
line,
tougher.
offensive line is young. They have Michael Fasusi committed. That's fantastic. I think one of the reasons Michael Fasusi committed to Oklahoma, and I'm not one of these like when Texas loses a recruiting battle of that caliber that attributes it all to NIL, because that's just I think a loser's approach to it in this day and age. But that's just my perspective. I think one of the reasons though that Michael Fasusi, and this is smart on his part, knows why he wants to go to Oklahoma, aside from Bill Beatonbaugh and the offensive line coach and all that stuff, is he sees this offensive line. It's young. And even though Texas is likely losing 4 of their 5 starters next year on the offensive line, Texas has more depth, like more playable depth on the offensive line that they've built up through recruiting. And they're a little bit ahead of the game in that department than OU is at this point. And I think Michael Fasusi sees a place for him like day one in that system at left tackle. Aside from that, though, I don't know what you do at quarterback moving forward. It was a bad performance from Jackson Arnold. Like there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was just a bad performance, bad turnovers at bad times, turnovers right when you get the ball, right when your defense gets you the ball, right in a good field position, you give it right back to them. Like just bad football. And look, I mean, if you're going to bench him, you might as well bench him then because the thing is, like, I haven't seen anything from Jackson Arnold yet, aside from some flashes in their bowl game a year ago, that you can say that you, as like an Oklahoma fan, can be like excited about. Um, I don't know. Like, I think the Hawkins kid, he's good. He was highly recruited, but he still has a long way to go. I don't know that he's ready for prime time. I don't know where you go. Like, we're less than 3 weeks now from Red River going against Texas, and then you got to play. Oklahoma has a brutal schedule. They got the short end of the stick on that
Yeah.
side.
Yeah,
Unfortunate
you
for
look
them.
at Oklahoma's schedule and you compare it to Missouri's schedule.
My overall point is just like I want to see where does Oklahoma go at quarterback from here moving forward because like you're going on the road to Auburn this weekend. And Auburn's not a good football team. But that is a tough place to play, right?
Oh yeah.
So and you have a good defense, so you can at least rely on that. But once you bench a guy, I don't know like what's going on in the psyche of a guy like Jackson Arnold, who was a 5-star and is still young and has only made like I don't know how many starts he's made, but you can count it on like one hand the number of starts that he's made in his career. Do they go with the young guy Hawkins to see what he's got against Auburn? Do they go back to Jackson Arnold? Is Jackson Arnold's confidence ruined right now? Like, I don't know. It's a rough situation offensively at this point for Oklahoma because of the offensive line and the quarterback. If you don't get the quarterback right in this sport, whether it's the NFL level or the college level, you can't compete for championships. It's just the
Simple as
bottom line.
that. And it's hard to even not even championships to even win a conference game when you're in the SEC if you don't have a
Right.
quarterback. So I mean, yeah, you hit it on the head. And I mean, if you're Oklahoma, right now it's just about getting healthy. And
Yep.
then I just don't think benching Jackson Arnold right now is really that Smart to the point you just made. Like, you don't want to kill the guy's confidence. He could be
Right.
the future of your program, and the last thing you want is for him to just transfer right out the door, and then
That's what you were hoping for when Dylan Gabriel left. I don't know. Hopefully Oklahoma figures it out because, I think they have a good defense. I think they have a top 20 caliber defense. I'll even go as far as that. Like, I think their defense is really good. I
yeah,
think they're well coached on that side of the ball, but a lot needs to be sorted out on the offensive line. And maybe if you're an Oklahoma fan, just know, like, in year one, it's not going to be, rainbows and butterflies in the SEC. And it might not even be as good as maybe even some of you thought it would be. I thought coming into the season, Oklahoma could be maybe even like a 8 or 9 win team. I don't know that I think that anymore with their schedule. It's mostly the quarterback and the schedule that I look at and say, I don't know how this all plays out for Oklahoma. Hopefully they can be bowl eligible. I think they will be, but I don't know. If this quarterback situation doesn't get better, and they play Tennessee, they play Alabama, they play pretty much they play Missouri. They play pretty much every top SEC team. They play Texas aside from Georgia. It's kind of the opposite on the Texas end. Texas plays every bottom SEC team aside from Georgia. They don't play Tennessee. They don't play Alabama. They don't play Ole Miss. Oklahoma plays Ole Miss. Like, holy shit. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about tonight before we play a little fun game to wrap things up was this game. Oh boy. This was a classic on CBS yesterday afternoon. USC and Michigan. Where do you want to start on this one?
man, oh man. Well, the first thing I'll say is I was so close to picking this game right. Like,
You're really
my
close.
brain and my gut just weren't matching up. So I was like, I'll just take Michigan to cover the spread and just go with that. But I knew, like, Michigan was going to come out swinging, man. You're like, these are the defending champs. They have a lot of the, for lack
Characteristics.
of, characteristics. The character of that roster is still there. So you make the move at quarterback, and as Joel Clapp put it, you kind of align the offense,
Yeah.
and with this kind of new identity, we're just going to run the shit out of the football, and
Yeah.
like it'll just be like, what are you going to do to stop it? And to their credit, with that identity, all of a sudden you get an offensive line that's playing better. They're coming off the ball. They're playing more aggressively. Against Texas, it wasn't like that. The offensive line didn't play that great in terms of the running game. I also like what they had found in this new kid at running back. Is it? I can't remember what his name is, but they didn't really bench Donovan Edwards, but um,
Oh,
they
Khalil
got
Mullins. Khalil
Mullins, right?
Mullins.
Yeah, they got Mullins in there a little bit more, and I like how he runs the football. He seems a little bit
Absolutely.
more fresh, and I like how he sees it. He's a little bit more patient, I think, and I think he just fits the running style that they need right now because he's able to get those big plays, those big chunks that they need. Because there's no way you're gonna go on 15 play drives if all 15 plays are runs. Like, you're bound to have negative plays if that happens. But if you're throwing in a 20-yard run, a 25, 35, 40-yard run in there somewhere in the drive, then all of a sudden it just gets things moving, gets things going. So I thought Michigan's offensively was really impressive. I don't know how sustainable it'll be moving
Yeah.
forward against. Uh,
Ohio State and Oregon.
yeah, exactly. With time to, you know, for those teams to have tape on them on this version of Michigan. This was essentially like a week 1 game in terms of from USC's defense standpoint. Like they didn't really know what they were facing here, and they kind of got punched in the mouth.
Yeah, I think from a Michigan standpoint, this was a Michigan team that not only from an on-field standpoint, but also from a recruiting standpoint, kind of needed a jolt, right? And it got it Saturday. And the only way that this Michigan program knows how to get it, which is smack an opponent in its chin strap, run it down its throat, and make life miserable for that opponent, for the most part, on defense in the first half. Get the lead and control the game. That's what they did. And if I were to tell you, if you were to tell me, and I was wrong, I got my prediction wrong. You were closer than I was. So I was wrong on that front. I thought USC was going to win and cover. Excuse me. I thought USC was going to win and cover. And they almost did. Like they were up, with 7 minutes to go in the game. Miller Moss made an incredible play on like a 3rd and 16. I don't know how he did that. We'll talk about USC though here in a minute. But if you were to tell me like 290 rushing yards for Michigan, 6.3 yards per carry to 96 for USC.
Padlock stat.
Yep.
Paper pop.
Paper pop. That's all I needed to know. Exactly. They ran the ball well. Love Khalil Mullings. Still like Donovan Edwards. He's kind of, I don't know if I even want to say struggled, because he's played some good defenses. But Mullings,
I think he's been like right around 4 yards per carry, which is down from years past.
It is down from where he has been in the past. But he did break an explosive in yesterday's game. He still has that part to him. But I kind of like it better as like a 1-2 punch. I think Michigan has found their 1-2 punch that they had a year ago with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. Now they have Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards. And I don't think it really matters who's the 1 and who's the 2. I was impressed with the way this Michigan offensive line played yesterday, especially in the first half. And I was especially impressed with the way Michigan avoided big penalties. Only 3 penalties, and none of them were like extremely killer. I thought they played very disciplined football yesterday. Now, in the second half, they did have some, mistakes. The fumble by Donovan Edwards in their own territory hurt, obviously. But I think they found like their identity. I think we knew what it eventually was going to be. And what it was going into everything. We just didn't know if it was going to be enough to overcome, the talent that they're facing. 32 yards passing, but Orji 43 yards on the ground. He did enough from that standpoint. Where I kind of still worry from a Michigan defense standpoint, even though they're still a really good unit, like they're still great defensively when they bring it on that end. They're not playing like an elite quarterback, or an elite offense with a ton of playmakers like Texas that just has a excellent game plan, like Joel Klatt talked about. Is they're not as good on as getting off the field on third downs so far this season as they were a year ago. That's a little bit worrisome, especially when they go up against an Oregon or a Ohio State, which they're still going to have to play. I don't know that they are. I still don't think they're a Big Ten contender or even like a playoff team. But like with this approach, with their schedule outside of Oregon and Ohio State, like I think if their defense continues to play at least at this level, or maybe even better, and they can punish teams physically and kind of drag them into the mud with the way they're running the ball. And if Alex Orji steadily improves as a passer, as long as they're not turning the ball over, like you can win 8 or 9 games with this. And credit to Sharon Moore. This is a big victory for him. You know, you now sit at 3-1. You play Minnesota next week. You should beat them. I think that was big for Michigan. On the USC side of things, what are your takeaways? Do you think any less of them than you thought going into the game? Do you still think just as highly of them? Was this just a matter of you just didn't get it done on defense when it mattered? What was your overall theme yesterday from the USC standpoint?
Well, I still think highly of them. I still think they're a really good team.
I would agree.
I think the turnovers really hurt yesterday for sure. The interception Miller Moss threw, or actually, I think it was two of them, right? I can't remember if it was one or
Well,
two.
the one hurt them. The pick six, obviously.
Yeah. Of course, yeah. Whenever you're throwing a pick six, that really does hurt a lot. But yeah, I think in the first half, like I said, it was like facing a team with no tape. Just there's nothing to go off of, and I think the game plan probably should have been have 9 dudes in the box, but even with that, I think there's no way they could have prepared for Michigan's disposition they came out with in this game. Like that would have been difficult to stop for anybody in that scenario with no tape. So that 14-point hole that they dug themselves in the big house, like that's like if you're to write a game script for when you're going to the big house, like that's about as bad as it gets. And for them to be able to fight like they did and end up taking the lead with 7 to go, I mean, yeah, like this team is really freaking good. And I wouldn't be shocked if they snuck into the playoffs still.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked either because they, unlike Michigan, they don't play Oregon. They don't play Ohio State, I don't believe. So the schedule lightens up. I won't say it lightens up, but it's not the most difficult thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, Miller Moss got beat up yesterday. I think the one area that could potentially be somewhat of an Achilles heel that's still not great yet is the offensive line. I don't think that offensive line is to the level of some of the other top teams in the country, right? It's just not there yet. Maybe it'll get there. Maybe it'll get better throughout the season. But like the contrast between this is an unfair comparison, but the contrast between the way Texas's offensive line played against Michigan and the way USC's offensive line played against Michigan is just not a comparison. Yeah. So they're not there yet on the offensive line, and Miller Moss is getting pressured and beat up a lot as he did yesterday. But credit to Miller Moss. Like, he proved something to me the way that he fought through taking all those hits. He made a couple incredible plays in the red zone to get them in the end zone on third downs. It wasn't his best game. It wasn't probably close to the best game he'll have in his career. But going on the road in the big house, falling down 14-0 against the defense that was ready to play, all the different looks that Wink Martindale throws at you, when you're getting beat up like that, it's tough. And he still came out of this game with 3 touchdowns and 1 interception, and all was this close to winning the football game.
Yeah.
I think USC still has come a long way on defense. They're just not there. I don't think they're at a championship level yet, but they're so much better than they were a year ago.
Yeah.
They're physical.
This is a good start.
This is a really good defense, and this will win them a lot of games in Big 10 play. So I still think USC is a top 20 team. Maybe they're not as close to top 10 as I thought coming into the game than they are. I think they might be closer to maybe 15 or somewhere in the 15 to 20 range.
Yeah.
But I still think they can contend for the Big Ten. I don't know about national championship. They're not a tier 1 team nationally, but I think they're still a really good football team. It ultimately just came down to, like you said, they just weren't fully prepared for what they saw yesterday with a new identity for Michigan. It was different than what Michigan had put on tape with Davis Warren. It just was totally different. So that's not an excuse. That's just the reality of the situation, right? Sometimes an excuse is just a reason for something happening, right? So that's that. But that was an awesome game. Like, if that's the kind of football we get on the Big Ten on CBS this year, for the most part, I'm in.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
I'm in. Okay. Any other major takeaways from what you saw in college football yesterday? You can talk about what we saw on Friday with Nebraska and Illinois. You can talk about anything else in the world of college football. Clemson looks pretty good offensively. That would be my takeaway from the past couple weeks. I think they're starting to figure it out a little bit offensively. I wouldn't count them out yet in that ACC race. Anything else from your standpoint?
I'll just go rapid fire through a few of them.
Okay.
Florida State still sucks.
Yep.
That's one. Mississippi State sucks more, apparently.
Yep.
Then you got it took Notre Dame 4 weeks to throw a touchdown pass.
Oof.
Like, really? Come on. And then the last one, Illinois is pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
They really impressed me, man. Like, I was not expecting that. And that was actually my first time seeing Dylan Raiola play. And he says he wears 15 for Tim Tebow, but that's got to be a joke, right? Like,
yeah. We all know what
he's
that is.
Mahomes. Like, he's Mahomes, man. Like,
We all know what that is. Yes.
yeah.
My takeaway from that game, I think we watched 2 NFL quarterbacks in that game on Friday night. I think Luke Altmaier is plenty good enough to be a draftable NFL player.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know exactly what his classification is, like what year he is and if he's eligible or not, but he's good.
I'm pretty sure he is. Yeah, I think, like, I could see him being like a,
mid-round
weird backup type. Like,
pick. Yeah. He's good. And I was impressed. I hadn't watched Illinois yet. I watched a little bit of their game against Kansas a couple weeks ago. But credit to Luke Altmaier, that offensive line, the defense, and those receivers. They're better and more skilled from a receiver standpoint than I thought. Sakari, Sakari Franklin.
Yeah.
The other guy, I'm forgetting his name.
I know who you're talking about. I think they both got injured this game too.
Yeah, Zakari Franklin got banged up a little bit. He came back later in the game, and it sucked because I had a prize picks. I had and it wasn't a big prize picks. It was $10 to win like 40 or something. But I had a Dylan Raiola passing yards, which he hit easily. It was like, yeah, he hit it easily. He went way over. And then I had Zakari Franklin over on receiving yards. And it was like 52.5. Got to 50.
Oh.
The only reason he didn't get he didn't hit the overs because he went out for like a quarter and a half with an ankle injury. He finally came back in on their last drive, but it was too late then.
And if he had stayed out, you would have gotten refunded.
Exactly. That's the other thing I wanted to mention. So that's
brutal.
I've had a couple of those brutal breaks. I'm sure everyone has.
Yeah, that's how it goes. That's how it goes.
The nature of the game. Okay. Anything else? I don't think so. You know what this week is, though? Do you know what this week is?
It's help me here.
Bama, Georgia. It's
Oh,
Bama,
right.
Georgia week.
Yeah. I was gonna say like really good schedule for college football this week, but I didn't know what you were getting at. So
Yeah, Bama, Georgia week. We'll be
yeah.
talking about that a lot
Oh yeah.
on Thursday. Um, I think
Did
that's about
Bama
it.
have a bye this week?
Bama and Georgia had a bye this week,
Ooh.
and they come off the bye and play each other
Fuck yeah. Okay.
in Tuscaloosa. Yep, it's gonna be fun. Uh, it's kind of the same thing with Texas and OU. Like after next week, they'll both have a bye, and then they'll play each other. They'll meet up in Dallas. There's a lot of those in college football. Like both teams that play each other will have a bye the week before, and then they'll come up, play each other off a bye. A couple things. Not saying these teams aren't in the tier 1 category, but I think the teams that we think are tier 1, but we just don't. We can't quite know for sure yet because I don't think the level of competition has been there, right? Ohio State, Ole Miss.
Yep.
Is there anyone else in that category? Maybe Oregon,
Penn State?
Penn State. I think a lot of those teams.
Yeah.
We just don't know yet. We think, but we don't know for sure. So we'll find it out. That's why we play the games.
To an extent, Miami too. Maybe a little Miami.
A little, but at least with Miami, you played a team on the road in Florida.
Yeah.
That kind of has a pulse somewhat. I don't think like after this weekend, I don't come away from this weekend thinking Florida is like the second or even the second to worst or even the worst team in the SEC.
Yeah.
I think if they get good quarterback play, they can be competitive. Not win a ton of games because of their schedule, but yeah, I mean the point stands, right? But even Miami to a certain extent, I think you can say that about. So we'll find it out. But until Tuesday, we're gonna do our NFL recap, and like we mentioned last week, we're gonna start throwing some twists into our NFL recap. So they'll look a little bit different each week, and then after next week's NFL games, we will still recap some of the games, but we'll do it in the form of a power ranking. We'll talk about the teams in the form of a power ranking like we did last season. So it's a good time in sports. We've got the NBA coming up here in about a
WNBA
month.
playoffs too.
MLB playoffs. Good news on. I won't even go there. We'll save that for another day. I just was gonna say the Yankees are in a really good spot right now. So are the Mets. The Mets are hot. We got the NBA coming up. We're going to continue some college basketball conversation on Thursday, but NFL recaps. I'm really excited because I am thrilled with the way the Pittsburgh Steelers played.
Yeah, man.
today.
I picked y'all against the spread this week.
That second half was one of the best second halves I've seen the Steelers play since Ben retired.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that probably on Tuesday. But until then, he's Emmy Nixon. I'm Michael Ween. The Texas Longhorns are still number 1 in the country, and I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. And we are thrilled about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Make sure you leave a like and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. We are deep in the heart of Longhorn sports, and we are out.